Hi everyone, welcome back to Karate API automation testing tutorial. So today in this class we are going to learn about background keyword in Karate API automation. So before going to discuss about background keyword, so we'll automate some of the APIs. So in the previous classes we used JSON placeholder users API. So today we are going to automate some of the APIs related to JSON placeholder. So this is a get API and it is giving the all the users list whenever I'm sending the request. So whenever I'm sending the request, so it is giving the list of users which is available in the JSON placeholder and it is giving the 200 response. So this is one validation we are doing with this API and one more API. So I want to filter one of the user in the JSON placeholder. So by using the user ID. Okay. So if you go here, so then you can see the ID in the response. So ID is one and the related information, user information will be here and the ID is two. So ID two user information is here. So particularly I want to uh, filter the information based on the user ID. So when I'm clicking on send, so then it is giving based on the response is coming based on the ID only. Now we filter based on the ID. So if you want to filter based on the ID number 3, so then you can filter the user details based on this ID. So now these two are get APIs and so here we are using the two base URIs. Okay, so if you observe this one, so this is the common thing from here. So just keep it aside this one. So then come to our Karate automation test. So here we know how to automate the basic get API. So just I created a feature file. So this is the first test start feature. So in the feature, so I am going to test JSON placeholder users API. So what is the specific scenario under the feature? We know we can write n number of scenarios. So my first scenario, my validation is verify the status code and the response structure. So as we verified here in the postman, so then when I'm hitting this API, so I'm validating the response code is 200 or not. In the same way, so I am passing the URL and I am giving the path. So based on the path, the total URL will be formed. So then I am expecting the header is application JSON and my API method is get and I'm expecting the 200 response. So this is what we did manually here and the same thing I written a automation code in Karate. So to verify the status code and the response structure here. In the same way, so when I come to this second API, so I am verifying the specific user details based on the ID. So the same thing we did in the postman. So I am getting the user details. So based on the user ID in the path. Okay, the same thing. So the same URL I'm using here and my path is, so based on the ID filter, I'm filtering the JSON response and my expected JSON response is JSON and my request type is get and I'm expecting the status code as 200. So this is the basic Karate code we written and we know how to write this one. So once it is, so whatever we did in the postman, the same thing we did by using the automation Karate automation framework. So once you run this one, so I am running these two APIs or this feature file, this first test feature file by using the sample runner. So once you run this one, so I'm just waiting to run here. So then you can see here, so Karate execution is done and so number of scenarios I executed, number of passed and number of failed and I can see the HTML, Karate HTML report here. So if you copy this HTML report, if you copy this HTML report and paste in one of the, so if you see this one, so you can see the feature is Karate Runner first test dot feature. Our feature is first test dot feature, and the title test JSON placeholder users API and passed 2 and failed 0 and scenarios executed is 2. So when I expand this one, so there are two scenarios. First scenario is verify the status code and response structure and verify the specific user. Both are passed. I don't see any failures in this report. So now, so what is the background keyword here? So if you see, if you observe these two scenarios, so most of the uh, data are repeated. So when you come to this URL, it is I'm using in this first scenario and I'm using in the second scenario. And if you observe this one, so header is application JSON, header is accept is equal to application JSON for these two scenarios. So here only we are discussing about the two scenarios, but in real time. So if you are working with one feature, so there may be a n number of scenarios, maybe 20, 30, 40, any possibility is there. So the same thing, so all the two lines, this header and the common URL for this JSON placeholder is common. So it is always we are reporting. So how to avoid this repeated code? So without this background keyword also, so we are able to automate these APIs and we are able to execute without any issue. So this is not compulsory. This is the optional in the Karate automation framework. So this background keyword is also known as the pre-scenario setup. So if there are n number of scenarios we are executing, so if you want to set up before this one, if you want to run something before the scenario, so then we can write in the background. So how can we write this one? So background. So background keyword is will be. So we need to write the background. So if you see, so whenever I'm writing the background and it is automatically the color is changing. So now it is related to this Karate framework. Okay. So if you write like this, if you write like this, and if I'm taking the URL, if I'm taking the URL from here, so just write star URL. Okay. So then you just copy this URL from here. Okay. I just removed this URL from the each scenario and written only one time in the background section. So once I written like this in the Karate framework, what it will use. So these steps in the background run before every scenario in the feature file. So whatever the steps I'm writing in the background, so whatever the number of lines I'm writing under the background, so then everything will be run before each scenario. So if there are n number of scenarios in a feature file, so if I'm writing something in the background, so that will execute before each scenario. So that is the first condition. So how it will help? So it is this background keyword will help to write our variables. So if you want to initialize any variables in Karate framework, a particular to this feature, then we can initialize the variables here and we can configure the headers. So there are, if I'm working with this header, okay, so maybe if you are working with any other API, so there may be a number of headers like So if you are using the authorization key, or if you are using the barrier code, or if you are using the any username and password, so everything, if you adding more headers related to your specific API, then you can just simply add it under the background. So then it will applicable for all the scenarios in the particular feature file. So it will be used to configure the headers and setting up the API endpoints. So this is the endpoint, right? So this endpoint is applicable for all the scenarios in the feature file. So now once again, so background keyword runs before each scenario in a feature file, and it is used to initialize the variables and configure the headers and setting up the API endpoints like this. So now what we did, so we avoided some of the reusable code in the feature file. So now if you execute this one, if you execute the same feature file, so by adding the background and removing some common code in the scenarios and added in the background. So now if you run and execute this one, so if you run and execute this one, now it is failed two times. Two scenarios are failed. Why? Because URL is not set. So if you come back here, if you come back here, then your URL color is different. Okay, just run one more time here. Run as sample runner. So now you can see it is passed two times. So what is the mistake? So the syntax is missed. So previously the color is totally different. Now the color is different. So now URL is identified in the karate. So this is the way we can debug. So the color uh, difference also we need to identify, and we need to make sure it should be in the karate expected format. So now if you see this one, if you go to this HTML report, add here, then you can see the number of scenarios passed is 2. So then if you expand this one, so that now the background key is added. So here we don't have a background, but we are able to run the same test with background and without background. So this background is always optional. So but if you want to avoid some reusable, if you want to avoid the reusable codes like URLs, headers and variables, so then you can use background keyword. So you can run the karate script without background and with background also, but better to use the background keyword in the karate framework. So now this is the pre-scenario setup, right? So we created the pre-scenario setup, means so before every scenario we are running the background, and so we are forming the path here, and we are sending the get, and we are validating the 200 response. And in the same way, so the URL, it the URL it is added here, and it is created a full URL, and we are requesting with the get API, and we are validating the status code. We are filtering the user details based on the ID. Okay. So, but what is the advantage and disadvantage of this background? So every time. So whenever we are using this background keyword, so the variables defined in the background are local to each scenario. So changes in one scenario do not affect others. So if you are, for example, if you are taking the authentication token at the base URL can be initialized here. So whenever you are using this URL or authentication token, so if you are calling once, so then automatically it is applicable for every scenario. And if you are configuring the headers like authorization, so you need to call only once and you can store in one variable and you can reuse for that each and every scenario wherever it is applicable. And one disadvantage is, so if you are missing something in the background, so then your whole execution will be stopped in the background section only. You are not able to run any one of the scenario from the scenario section, meaning so your test will fail in your background section itself. And it works like before and after section. So when you are working with the JUnit or when you are working with the test ng, so you know at the rate before or at the rate after uh, annotations, right? So the same way in the karate, instead of at the rate before, we will use the background keyword here. Okay. So if you are writing more information or if you are adding more information in the background section, so then it will affect the total execution time. So meaning, so it will load, so this background will load each and before each scenario, right? So then the total execution time will increase if you are adding the more information in the background section. So then you need to be limited up to this URL and the headers, and any authorization tokens are available, or if you want to call any other feature, so then you can call it once and you can limit it to that one. So otherwise the total execution time will be increased and the your performance will be automatically decreased when you are loading this background keyword. So this is a small explanation about the background. So background keyword is very, very important in the karate. So when you are writing with the when you are working with the more features and more functionality. Thank you.